please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your work as a writer, musician, and advocate?
Yeah, Lydia, my name is Ray Hartjen. I am a writer and a musician. I live in Southern California in a town called Mission Viejo, in between Los Angeles and San Diego. And yeah, I bill myself as a writer and a musician. Something I feel most proud about, and one of the biggest honors of my life is being a cancer patient advocate, an advocate for caregivers, and an advocate for allies. And that really is something that I've been later on in life. And the impetus for it was me becoming a cancer patient myself. In March of 2019, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And for those of you out in the audience who are unfamiliar with it, it's a blood cancer. It's an incurable but treatable blood cancer. And so I began treatment in March of 2019. I've been in treatment ever since. And it's been a learning process for me, Lydia. And the big part of that is understanding that I wanted to be like the people who helped me early on in my diagnosis, and to do that, that led me into my advocacy work. And like I said, it's been but aside from being married to my wife, Lori, for over 30 years, raising two great children, it's been the honor of my life working with cancer patients and their families and their allies around the world. It's having an opportunity to hear their stories, share my stories, talk about the different things we're doing. It's been a wonderfully enriching experience.
Well, that's very wonderful. Now, before we move to your diagnostic odyssey, how would you have described your life, your identity, and your sense of purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been going through life, satisfactorily, happy. I felt as though I did have a purpose, and purpose certainly built around the family. I was very cognizant of my core values and using those core values, to kind of map out what I wanted to accomplish. But I also was living in a bubble of good health. Right. I was, a hockey player, a cyclist. I would do thousands of miles on my bicycle each year just to be able to eat and drink pretty much whatever I wanted to. And I ate and drank pretty much whatever I wanted to. I was in good health. I still feel as though I'm in good health. But the cancer diagnosis, that's when I began to learn a little something more about myself. And I like to share just a quick example with you and your audience. When I was first diagnosed, doctor told me, hey, you'll do an induction therapy treatment with some chemotherapy and immunotherapy for 3 to 6 months, and then we'll probably do a stem cell transplant. I'm like, great, 3 to 6 months. I am an overachiever. We're going to do that in 3 months, maybe even less. So I set out, Lydia, to be the best cancer patient the world's ever seen. I'm going to continue to work out really hard. I'm going to clean up my diet a little bit, and take care of myself nutritionally. Cancer was the first thing I thought about in the morning, the last thing I thought about at night, pretty much filled my day in between. And 10, 11 days later, my wife and I, Lori, were sitting in a restaurant with our son, Raymond, and I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm worn out from my fight against cancer. It's been like 10 or 11 days, not even capable of reading the menu, just tired. And it kind of dawned on me there. I knew that my whole being, my whole person was it was more than just my physical being, right? And, I knew that there was, other components of me, but then it really kind of dawned on me. It's like, man, my mental component, the emotional component, the spiritual component, neglecting any one of those can drag down my physical ability. And I had neglected those parts of me, and as a musician, I'm quite familiar with the mixing board, more guitar. I'm a guitar player, more guitar, less of everything else, right? But, being able to mix on a mixing board, and realizing that I had neglected that, mental, emotional, spiritual component of me, and it dragged down my physical being. I was exhausted. And so, it took a day or two, but I realized in my head, like, wow, Ray, you just learned something about yourself. Maybe you kind of knew it before, but now you're able to really articulate it in your head. What else can you learn about this? What else can you, if you approached your illness your disease with a growth mindset. What can you learn about not only the disease, but about yourself? And if you can learn things about yourself, what can you do to better your treatment, to better yourself as a person? So I revisited a timeline exercise that I used to facilitate as part of a time management course in my professional career. And I'd like to share it with you right now, if it would be all right, and you out in the audience, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, that's great. If you don't, it's not that complex of an exercise. You can do it mentally in your head. You just simply draw a horizontal line from left to right. On the far left-hand side, make a little tick mark. And the far right-hand side, make a tick mark. So there you have a line segment. And then underneath that left-hand tick mark, you just write the letter B. And that represents your birth. And then the right-hand side, you guys are smarter than me. You're already way ahead of me. You write the letter D, and that represents your death. What you have right in front of you is the timeline of your life on this planet, right? And now the introspective part comes. We know that tomorrow is not promised. Intellectually, we know that. But where do you believe you are on your timeline? Where do you feel in your heart you are in your timeline? Just take a moment, kind of consider that, and make a slash mark in between those in that line segment. See, Lydia, when I facilitated this, I was 54 when I was diagnosed. When I facilitated it prior, in my life, I wouldn't even, as I'm facilitating this class, I wouldn't even really think much about it. I just kind of throw my line right in the middle. Because I was going to live to be forever. I was going to live forever. And if not forever, then I was going to live at least to 100. So I'd be just throw it right there in the middle. So when I revisited that timeline after my diagnosis, I being intellectually honest with myself, I said, my tick mark's much further to the right than it was prior to my diagnosis. What's that mean to me as a person? So I looked at that, and almost immediately, what came to my mind was, Ray, like a lot of people out there, you've probably tended to take time for granted. And I said, all right, if I've taken time for granted, what does that mean? How did that manifest itself? And then, right away, I realized because I took time for granted, I took people and relationships for granted. So right there, I learned something about myself, and that learning was became a pivot point, to reassess my priorities. What are the things that I want to do, and who do I want to do them with? And that has really kind of given me new focus. It's an ability to learn about myself, and the impetus from that was my diagnosis with multiple myeloma.
Can you share with us how your priorities changed before and after the journey of cancer?
Yeah, my core values have remained really consistent over the last 25 years or so. It's family, friends, fun, fitness, education, and challenge. Those are my values, right? And so they really haven't changed. But in looking at my timeline exercise and recognizing that there's different different variables within my whole being. I went to a patient support group for all types of cancers very early on, and these people kind of taught me what it was like to be a cancer patient, right? My head was kind of swimming, and they kind of, like, hey, we've been there. And I was able to see a group of people, a room full of people, brave cancer fighters, some of their family members. And, as they helped me along, I wanted to be one of those type of people. I wanted to, help where I could. When I needed a helping hand, there were people there to reach back and pull me forward to where I wanted to be, to where I needed to be. And I, kind of right there said, that's the priority for me. There are going to be people that follow me on this journey, in this fight. And if I'm feeling good and I have that capability within me, I want to be one of those people. I want to be one of the people that can reach back, grab a hold of somebody and say, you are not alone in this fight against cancer. I'm with you. And if there's anything I can do to help you, I'm here for you. You are part of a strong community. So I wanted to be that person, if I was capable, to be able to help others forward. So, that's one example of reprioritizing. Other examples are, again, focusing on those relationships. Who are the people that are most important to me? Let's connect. If I'm thinking about somebody who's close to me, let's connect with them today, not tomorrow. I would tend to take those relationships for granted because I took time for granted, right? So if I'm thinking about my friend Lydia, I'm like, oh, I'll connect with her tomorrow. She's gonna be there tomorrow. I'm gonna be there tomorrow. Everything will be fine. No, let's focus on that person right now. Let's nurture those relationships that are important to me. And then what do I want to do? I have a lot of stories to tell. And I've told stories professionally for my career for lots of different organizations, lots of different stories. But I wanted to tell my own stories as well. And so that's when I began to refocus, my energies in writing, writing books, writing music, and the like. And again, it's we all deserve satisfaction, fulfillment, peace of mind, and joy, right? And I think, understanding your core values, using those core values to kind of, understand a little bit of your purpose allows you to, do what you want to do with who you want to do and, get that peace of mind, that satisfaction, that fulfillment, that joy that we all deserve.
Beautifully illustrated. Uh, Moving backward, starting with the baseline, what are the symptoms or the factors that you suspect you are not doing physically or mentally well?
If you're talking about pre-diagnosis stage, in hindsight, I was probably a bit fatigued. But again, at the time, I was 54 years old, a full-time job, married, two kids in expensive private universities. Give me a break. I should be tired, right? But my diagnosis journey, I felt good. I wouldn't have been going. I wouldn't be going to the doctor now if I didn't have cancer. I had treatment 2 days ago, and I and I wouldn't go if I didn't have cancer. And that's what I tell people is my diagnosis started with a low red blood cell count. I was anemic, slightly anemic. And trying to find a source of that anemia, it just led me to additional blood tests, more sophisticated blood tests, and then ultimately a bone marrow biopsy. And that bone marrow biopsy showed that 90% of my bone marrow was cancers. And there's people out there, 90% of your bone marrow is cancers. That sounds like a lot. Yeah, it does sound like a lot. But I'd still consider myself to have caught multiple myeloma rather early in the diagnosis phase. Multiple myeloma manifests itself in the bone marrow, but because it's inside your bones, it tends to leach out into your bones, and you get these lesions on your bones, a weakness in your bones. And a lot of multiple myeloma patients get diagnosed because they suffer through some unexplained bone fractures. I know patients that have gotten up out of bed and taken a couple of steps and suffered compression fractures in their vertebrae. That's weird, right? That's unnormal. That's unexplainable. Let's go to the doctor, figure that out. And they say, oh, we figured it out because you have multiple myeloma. I was lucky in that 90% of my bone marrow was cancers, but none of it was, on my bone lesions. I get a PET scan here in another week and a half. Hopefully that's still the case. I'm hoping. But I was able to catch it kind of early. I didn't have to go through radiation treatments and things like that. If there's one message I can give anybody out there, you need to see your doctor annually, no matter how well you feel. And as part of your annual visit with your doctor, make sure you just get a routine blood test. Again, my journey with multiple myeloma, my fight against blood cancer, all started with a slightly anemic score on my red blood cells, something that was picked up from a routine blood screen. And I'd had one previously the year before when I underwent a knee surgery. Everything was normal then. 1 year later, the markers show that maybe we need to explore what the root cause symptoms are. So for me, not a lot of symptoms. Hindsight, fatigue, but it's something that I'm thankful that we caught when we did.
What was the hardest part? Because you said at the beginning you had a stem cell transplant, right? What
Yes.
was the hardest part of preparing for the stem cell transplant?
Preparing, it's a bit of a mental challenge. By going through it, I can look back in hindsight and I know that I'm stronger than I knew I was. beforehand, and I like to tell other patients that as well. You are stronger than you know. You can rise to this. And the beautiful thing is that you don't have to do it alone. There's an online community that is vibrant. It is supportive. It is considerate. It is compassionate. It is empathetic. And together as a community, we are stronger even still, right? Hardest part, stem cell transplant isn't so much preparing for it, it's actually going through it. And for those of you unfamiliar with a stem cell transplant, it's what they do is eradicate your bone marrow, all of it. But beforehand they'll do a dose of chemotherapy, which isn't particularly fun. For me, it was a drug called Cytoxin. I think it was called Cytoxin, and that just spurs your body into going, hey, whoa, something is different here. And it draws stem cells out of your bone marrow into your bloodstream. Then a process called apheresis, sort of like dialysis in a way. It skims off those stem cells and separates them and collects them. Sort of like when you get plasma and your blood comes out, they spin it, the plasma gets saved and the blood's, kept back to you. Same type of thing with a stem cell transplant, or with the apheresis and the stem cell transplant. Kind of harvest the stem cells. Then you get to rest a little bit, and then the hard part comes a little bit. Yeah, the hard part is a 3 wicked doses of chemotherapy that eradicate the bone marrow. Just everything is absolutely gone, and it can take a toll on your body physically. You don't have any blood. You don't without bone marrow. You as a patient don't have any capability to produce any more red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets. So you only have what's coursing around in your body at the time. And they do that because they want to clean out the bone marrow of as much cancer. They want to clean out bone marrow completely, but take out as much cancer as they possibly can, reintroduce your stem cells, and those stem cells come in and find a brand new place to live. And then they start building bone marrow and the like. There's like 11, 12 days there from the last dose of chemotherapy, reintroduction of your bone cell, reintroduction of your stem cells till they engraft and they begin to show that they have taken nest in the bones, built bone marrow, and then you begin to see platelet counts rise and the like. Toward the end of that was a pretty tough time for me. I was hospitalized for 4 days, just because I've exhausted, had a little bit of a fever and the like. It's a tough process, but patients out there, if you're listening, if you're watching, you can handle it. I did it, therefore you can do it. You're stronger than you know, and again, that you have people there, they're with you along the fight.
Uh, Also, during this stage, were you asked by your oncologist, for example, about your life way rather than only your condition? So the treatment could be tailored to your needs and wishes. Some of the questions that could be asked by the oncologist or how you understood your illness, what your greatest fears were, what goals and priorities mattered most. So if they have the answers to these questions, they will be able to personalize the treatment according to your needs. Did you encounter this experience?
Yes and no. I tend to be kind of an aggressive personality, a very proactive personality. I wanted to attack this. You do have conversations with your caregiver. I did conversations. It's a team, and it's a choice on what you want to do, right? Some people are like, you know what, the cure is worse than the disease, and they don't do treatment at all. But I was young. I'm 54 years old. I turned 55, 11, 19 days after my diagnosis. So, because I was going through the stem cell transplant process, I was, 55 and a half or whatever. Still young and still in good shape, and it was something I wanted to do. And it was certainly, something that my oncologist wanted to do as well, and recommended. But yeah, there are there weren't maybe a lot of choices for me at the time. There's a lot of choices, I think, for patients now, for multiple myeloma and other blood cancers. CAR T-cell therapy in the United States has been approved as a second-line treatment. So, after induction treatment and, once a relapse or refractory multiple myeloma occurs, that is a very real option for people. Clinical trials on tri-specific antibodies. I don't know, what they seem very promising, but that looks like something down the roadmap. So not necessarily a stem cell transplant. I wanted to do the stem cell transplant. The induction therapy was working for me. It was, the multiple myeloma was getting less and less visible in my blood work. And, my doctor used the analogy. It's like, you're in a boxing match and your opponent's on the ropes. They're tired, they're hurt. Here's a chance to go for the knockout. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But yeah, there were conversations, kind of, limited choices for me, but I understood those choices. My choices were to maybe not do anything at all, to not do a stem cell transplant, but to maybe go through the beginning of it and go through apheresis and collect some stem cells and save them for later, and then try some other lines of treatment that weren't a complete stem cell transplant, but would be like, IV delivery of carfilzomib, Kyprolis, and other lines of treatment like that. So yeah, we had those discussions, and I think it's important for all patients to discuss with their doctors. And if you don't, I know sometimes you don't really have a choice on who your doctor is, who your physician is, but if you have questions and you're not getting answers, try harder. And if you're still not getting answers to your questions, try a different doctor. They work for you, and you have the right to have questions. Patients need advocates. You are your biggest advocate. But if you aren't, accomplishing success the way that you feel in that, self-advocacy, try to find somebody to help you along the way.
So, how can patients or cancer patients, for example, make sure that their concerns are clearly communicated and truly heard, other than looking for a different oncologist or physician?
Yeah, the online communities certainly help. Beware of, getting your medical degree from Google University. You can go down rabbit holes. You can also get a lot of, misinformation. But, I think it's important for patients to know that you're not the first one. There's people out there like you. There's people who have been there for you. And this online community you can find, on TikTok, to Instagram, Facebook, it's a wonderfully supportive community. Well, we all get something, Lydia. We're all in this together, right? There's organizations, the IMF, the MMRF. I'm speaking for multiple myeloma in particular. They have great, guidelines, not guidelines, but suggestions and questions to make sure that you're able to answer, and you're getting these answers, primarily from your oncologist, right? So, asking those questions. It's also sometimes, I think, helpful to bring someone with you, a caregiver or an ally, to just kind of to listen, because there's a lot of things as a cancer patient, particularly early on in the journey, where you're kind of overwhelmed by what you just heard, and maybe you're not hearing some of the what follows afterwards, right? So, it's sometimes helpful to have somebody along, alongside. It's like, hey, Lee, what did you, take from this conversation? What did you understand this answer to be, or what have you? Another, I think, important thing is writing down your questions ahead of time, and coming to the piece of paper, because when you get there under the bright exam spotlight with a white coat in front of you, again, a lot of thoughts go through your mind, but sometimes they're not the questions. You forget the questions. You get home, you're like, oh, I forgot this, and it's just something different than sending a message, an email message through a portal or something like that. For me, I find it, better just to, get all the communication, including nonverbal cues, in a face-to-face conversation with the doctor. Does
You
that
have
answer your
spoken,
question, Lydia?
yes, and you have also spoken about how overwhelming the healthcare system can be, including communication with providers. How
Mhm.
did your family, including your wife, help you navigate that uncertainty?
For a while there, Lydia, we got hard mail. I mean, like, in the postal service, mail from care providers, pharmaceutical companies. I mean, it's overwhelming here in the United States, the amount of bureaucracy that's involved, administrivia that's involved with healthcare. And I'm blessed in that I don't I have my spouse, Lori. She understands it, and she's taken that burden on for me. I don't understand it. I'd be completely confused. And it's, another thing I like to tell people is if you know somebody that's going through a serious health issue, reach out to them and see if there's any way that you can help, particularly if that person's on their own. I can't imagine having gone through this alone. Just medical appointments and treatment would be overwhelming for me by myself. But then you add on all the stuff that's associated with just healthcare in the United States. It's different in other places, and it's unimaginable. I would completely need help. So if you know somebody that's going through a serious health issue, whether they ask for help or not, please do yourself a favor, because you will find this rewarding. See if there's any way that you can help them out. But yeah, for me, it takes an army. Again, we all get something. We're all in this together. So how can we come together and help one another like humans are supposed to do?
You receive practical help and emotional presence from your family. What kind of support was most meaningful to you during the diagnostic odyssey?
Ah, another good question. It's interesting. Most helpful for me. I think it's just like the human connection. I look at things maybe a little bit different than some other patients that I know. People. There's been patients in my support group that says, you find out who your friends are real fast. And to me, that's always hurt me in my heart, because I I don't think that's given enough grace to your friends. There are people that might just kind of disappear out of lives, and I've heard some horror stories about, like, a husband of a patient friend of mine who she's in one of my support groups, and he's like, I kind of like basically he said, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out. I'm out of the marriage, and they separated, and primarily she believes because of her diagnosis, and that's a horrible story. And you do have people who talk about how some friendships went away, but I always like to caution patients. It's like, you don't know what's going on the other side, right? These people were important to you at one point in time. That's why they're in your life as a friend, right? You care for them and you love them, and if you do care for them and love them, maybe give them a little bit of grace. There's a couple of things that might be going on. You don't know what's going on in their life, so there's something there, right? And also, there's so many people that just don't know what to do or what to say in those instances. Now, I look back in my life, and it's, there were instances where I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything. And I regret that. One example I'll give, that, and this is after I already knew better. This is me as a patient. I'm at a kind of an event at my cancer center a few years back, and it was being facilitated by folks, and there's different activities and stuff like that. And at one point in time, they brought in a member from the staff, and it was going to be her last day of work at the center, and she's taking a leave, and somebody said, well, hey, good luck, and I look forward to you coming back. And the woman began to break down and cry, and she said, well, I won't be coming back. I'm leaving because I have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And we were stunned, air just out of the room, right? And all of us, we were all cancer patients. We'd all been through this. There were people in that room that said, you find out who your friends are really fast. We didn't know what to do, and I look back today with regret. I didn't know this woman, but she needed a hug. She needed compassion. She needed empathy, and I knew better, and I still didn't know what to do. So, when you talk about what was most important for me, it was the human connection. It was the people who were there for us, whether it was preparing a meal for us or just, like, hey, how you doing? Asking questions. So you don't even have to, people didn't have to say anything. Just sat down next to you and watched the game on the television or whatever, knowing that those relationships are still there, that human connection. I like to encourage patients, man, give your friends a break. Some people don't know what to say, what to do. If those people are important to you, then, reach out to them. Say, hey, I don't know what this, I don't know what to say, but you're important to me. What's up? And particularly if you're not the patient, if you're the friend out there, just confess. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, but I'm hoping we can get through a kind of a difficult conversation for about 30 seconds. That's all, and figure this out together. You're friends for a reason. You have a close relationship for a reason. Let's not let that end just because somebody has a diagnosis.
Beginning of the interview, you said that you are a writer, musician, and a cancer survivor. So after the diagnosis, Ray, did your identity shift from writer and musician to patient or cancer survivor, or you were able to build a balance between these three different identities?
Great question. And I also like to talk about this a lot too. On March 10th, 2019, I had a lot of roles in my life. I was an employee, I was a bandmate, I was a teammate, I was a boss, I was a father, I was a husband, I was whatever. I had all these roles. And you know what? On March 11th, 2019, when I got diagnosed, I had every one of those roles still. None of those roles went away, right? People tend to think about, cancer or some other illness taking things away from you. For me, yeah, there's some things that have been taken away. I am somewhat tethered to a infusion center. I get an infusion every week, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, right? So that's my treatment plan. So, can I take like a 3 week a trip around the world? No. I can take a slightly less than a 2 week trip around the world, but I can't take a 3 week trip around the world. Some people think that, cancer, they get focused on everything cancer takes away from you or an illness takes away from you. For me, very soon thereafter, I had all those roles upon diagnosis previously and post, but now I have new roles. Now I want to be a cancer patient advocate. I want to be like those people that helped me. I want to be a cancer patient fundraiser. So I'm a fundraiser. I want to, be a resource for the cancer community. My second book is a book called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. It tells my story of fighting myeloma. It's a book that means a lot to me because it's a personal story, but it's a book that I wanted to be from the community, for the community, to benefit the community. My net writers' proceeds from that book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, are dedicated to they're pledged and donated to the MMRF, the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. All those things I just mentioned, Lydia, those were things that further enriched my life as a cancer patient. Those are roles that had been added. And like I said earlier, being a cancer patient advocate, through that book alone, I have interacted with patients from New Zealand, Australia, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Western Europe, all through the UK, all through the United States. People reaching out to me through my social media properties saying, "Hey, I read your book," and I start listening to their stories. We start talking. That's been super cool. Through that book, Lydia, I've met you. You're in the UAE, halfway around the world. So it's been, like I said, a very rewarding experience and enriched my life. Yeah, cancer's taken some things away. Cancer's added more. One thing it's added for me is that I'm the best version of me at 62 years old now than I've ever been. I was on a podcast, maybe a year and a half ago with another myeloma patient, the host, Helena Strauss, and she asked this great question. She asked, "Would you change your diagnosis?" I was like blown away. I was like, holy smokes. And I thought about it for a moment and I'm like, it's in real time. It's happening in the podcast. It's not going to be edited. It's going to be, it's going to be live. What are you going to say? And, like, man, Helena, that was her name. Helena, I don't want to have cancer. I would love to be cured from cancer. But my gut says, and my heart says, I wouldn't change my diagnosis. It has redirected my life into a different type of purpose. I have, deeper, richer relationships, and I'm the best me that I can be. I don't know if that would have happened if I had not been diagnosed. And so, my message to so many others is don't wait for a health diagnosis, a negative diagnosis of something to make the important changes in your life. Take that introspective, contemplative journey. Let's change it beforehand. I met a person, recently said, I had a cancer scare. And, luckily, it didn't turn out to be cancer. So I'm great. What did you learn? That's great news. What did you learn from that cancer scare? I mean, if you had had cancer, what changes would you have made? Make those changes now. You don't need to be, have an illness to make positive change in your life. For me, again, I want to concentrate on, my core values. I think it's important for anyone's purpose to be rooted in their values. When you're living contra to your values because you feel this conflict and this internalized stress. An example I give would be family. A lot of people say, family is, a core value of mine, and family means, it's important to define what that is to you, because family means something different to almost every, person, right? But, if it's like, I want to be a present father, yet at the same time, you spend 80 hours a week at work, there's this conflict brewing inside, right? I have to work. I have to, have the money to support my family. Yeah, but that takes me away from my value. So, I think it's important to identify your core values. I have those core values, and they've been relatively consistent. But it was just, again, pivoting my life purpose. Instead of spending so much time telling other people's stories, which I still do. I'm a freelance writer. I'm a marketer at heart, and so I'm a freelance writer, and I have freelance clients, and I write for them to help further their business, help further their personal careers and the like. But I want to dedicate, I do that freelance, so I have time for myself to do my own creativity and explore what I want to do. I was working on a book manuscript this morning before our call. I carve out that time for myself. I think a lot about legacy. What are the things I want to accomplish, and what do I want to leave behind? My wife and I, recently became aware that our daughter is expecting her first child, which is our first grandchild, right? And so like, what do I want to leave for my grandchild? Her due date's early December. I hope I'm around for her. And I don't buy any green bananas. I'm not, I'm not taking tomorrow for granted. I'm not even taking today for granted. But I hope I'm there for her. But if I am there, I want to be there for a long time after that. And hopefully I am physically. But if not, what do I leave behind for my granddaughter, for myeloma patients, for my family, my friends?
You talked about having a growth mindset multiple times. What has multiple myeloma taught you that you might not have learned otherwise?
Yeah, I think, I use the term growth mindset, but what I really like to, sometimes that's, it even kind of sounds a little jargony, a little psychology or something like that. What I like to tell some people is, a beginner's attitude, that sense of discovery that we all had as children, right? As children, we would go out of the house, and we'd just be learning, right? And part of that is that we didn't have a lot of life experience yet, and we didn't think we knew it all. For those of you who are listening, not watching, and just use air quotes, there's it tends to be a time in life after a while we become jaded to learning opportunities. I already know this, and we kind of like stop listening, we stop looking. A growth mindset is falling back to the way we were as we were children, and is going out with a sense of discovery, even if it's something you've already seen and heard before. What's a few things that I can just pick out of today's conversation, out of the thing I just read or the thing I just saw, that are new, that I can learn? What can I relearn about myself? What can I unlearn? What have I learned that I need to unlearn? That's a discovery mindset. And once as a patient, sometimes you discover things about your disease. Like, oh, this is what the disease is about. This is how it manifests itself. These are the different treatments. These are the different new treatments under, being, looked at in the research labs and the like. But I think a lot of time, most of the times, it's your understanding of yourself, and who you are as an individual, and what you want to do, who you want to do it with. How can you better yourself? How can you, again, make changes in your life, even if it aren't changes, just focusing on your happiness, your fulfillment, your satisfaction, your peace of mind, your joy. And then, y- for me, for example, discovering I get a lot of that by giving that to other people, right? How can I help them achieve joy, satisfaction, fulfillment? Those are things that bring me joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment. So, it builds stronger relationships. For me, cancer has been a learning process. And I was fortunate enough to be able to learn early on. Those experiences I had within the first couple of weeks of my diagnosis, really kind of changed the course of the way that I've approached multiple myeloma. One thing, when I was first diagnosed, and I said, I'm working out really hard, I'm going to be in great physical condition and the like. My entire life up to that point had been built, Lydia, around kind of like capstone events, milestone events, right? Whether I was a student, there was going to be an exam or a paper due. If I was a musician, it was going to be a performance. If I was an athlete, it was going to be a game or a race or something like that. At work, it was the delivery of a big project or something. There are always like these milestones, these tent poles, right? That were coming around. I learned because I was so physically exhausted after just, 10, 11 days of this cancer journey that, fighting multiple myeloma, there is no game day. There is no fight night. There is no milestone event. There is no tent pole. It's every day. Every day is game day. Every night is fight night. Multiple myeloma is incurable. So, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And I'm not focused on one thing. It's day by day. What can I do to make the most today? How can I bring my best to the fight against multiple myeloma? Because I know multiple myeloma is not taking a day off. Incurable. So what do I do today to better myself against that fight, prepare myself for that fight, and to live the life I want to live?
You describe how the support group helped you in navigating the uncertainty. Did they teach you about comparison and how can people avoid comparing their, let's say, healing journey, life path, or struggles with someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I learned that myself. It's like, the comparisons amongst other patients are not. It's not. You don't need to be doing that. You shouldn't be focused on that, right? It's like, looking at the odds and the numbers. Well, like if they're doing poorly, that increase, then there's better odds for me. Now, all those are like mutually exclusive events, right? So, the thing I learned is don't compare yourself to other patients. It's not productive. It causes stress, it causes anxiety, and it's not helpful in any way at all. And one thing you also learn is, the person who's been to more than one group meeting is empathy, right? And being able to, there's so much group sessions work because people get to talk, people get to share, and the only reason they talk and share is because people listen. And coming from the same place, it's developing that empathy. Some of us have it, with in generous supplies. Some of us it's a continuing working process. But that ability to empathize, it's really kind of a superpower. It's not a sign of weakness to have empathy for another, but to understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and understanding their behaviors. That's super helpful for you as an individual. It's also for the others who get to receive that. So, another learning lesson for me from the group, don't worry too much about comparisons. Here, only comparisons about, where you are and where you want to be. Comparisons internal within yourself. One thing that, is important about groups is the empathetic, understanding of the community.
Now I want to ask you about music.
Mhm.
I- Is music for you considered to be a coping strategy?
Yeah, and everyone needs a coping strategy, whether you have a disease or not, right? We have a world that is filled with noise. Because of that noise, there's going to be stress, anxiety, and the like. We all need coping, whether you meditate, or go down to the beach and look at the waves roll in, look at take a hike through the mountains. You know, everyone needs a coping strategy. For me, music's always been an important part of my life. I mean, I don't understand really people who say like, I don't get music, I don't like music or whatever. I'm like, what do you mean you don't get music or like music? I mean, you have a percussion section in your chest. Your heart's beating with a rhythm. You've got the rhythm of your respiratory system. Everybody's got that percussion, that backline going through their bodies. music's always been important to me. Listening is can be therapeutic as well. People have their playlists with to reflect their different moods or to get them in different moods, right? Like I want to get fired up to go to the gym. I got my fired up playlist. I got my relaxing playlist. I got my drown my sorrows playlist or whatever. So listening's always been a bit of a coping strategy, but also playing music. And I'm a guitar player. And whether I'm playing other people's songs or noodling around and creating my own songs, I mean, there's a meditative kind of practice to that. Just you know, picking up the instrument, working through chords, working through notes, putting notes together, exploring, different rhythms and tempos, different tunings and timbres and the like. There's this, it's not only, scratches the creative itch, but there's, it's a contemplative part to it. I wouldn't call it meditative. This year I've just started, practicing meditation, and that I think it's different. But they for me there's some similarities to it. You kind of lost in the music, and that separates consciously and subconsciously from the other things that may have I needed to take a break. Yeah, I was about ready to say I wouldn't call it a mental reset, playing music, but it is a mental reset, and a refocus of my energies on something else that takes me away from other things. It's necessary. It's not necessarily takes me away from bad things. It just takes me away from other things, kind of like broadens, a bit of my perspective, but allows me to take focus off of one area that might be draining a lot of my energy and focusing on something else. And, as a, musician, sometimes it becomes kind of, automatic. You're not really even thinking about stuff. That happens on stage for me a lot. It's like, well, wow, I've been looking around, trying to make connection with audience, smiling at people, eye contact, and like, I, did I even sing the song correctly? Did I hit all the verses in the chorus? And all I know is that I'm at the end. I'm like, what happens? Sort of like when people are driving. Sometimes it's like I don't I don't even know what turns I took, but I'm at my destination. So yeah, music's a coping strategy for me. I hope that wasn't too long of an answer. Again, everybody needs something to help cope because we live in a world that's filled with stimulus, and so what are the ways that we can get back to ourselves?
Did you tell your multiple myeloma journey through songwriting?
I'm in the process of it. I no, I can say no, I haven't previously, but about a year ago, I sat on an airplane and I watched a concert. It was a concert, I believe the band's called Ghost, a very theatrical production. And, I'm like, wow, this theatrical production is really, each song is a chapter in a book. And I'm like, I want to tell my myeloma story through music, just like this. So I'm in the process of songwriting. I don't have any demos cut yet, but when I do, they'll be put up on my YouTube channel, put up on Spotify and YouTube Music and the like, for others to take a listen to. But yeah, it's a work in process is telling the myeloma story through music and lyrics.
Which parts of songwriting you expect that it could be easy to translate into music, and which parts are the hardest? Could be the hardest.
Uh, Another good question. Thank you for all these good questions, making me think. The best music, actually the best any storytelling, whether it's music and books, speeches or whatever. It's making an emotional connection, having people feel. As a creative, about the worst feedback you can get is, yeah, whatever. There's no reaction at all. I would rather have people hate it. Like, boy, that was horrible. I hate that. At least you're eliciting, some type of strong feeling. And sometimes artists, do things just to get people to hate it. You can see it a lot of works that's done, knowing that there's also probably going to be the other outlier on this standardized distribution curve, that like, I really love this. This is great. This is unique, right? I think, the hard part is, to tell a story, it already resonates with me, but how can I make it resonate with others so they can understand, right? So I think the difficult part is, the ebb and flows. When I think this might be true. I'm just thinking about the stages of grief, and there's probably the stages of grief probably apply to having a diagnosis like a cancer diagnosis, multiple myeloma. And, so there's this differencing of emotions and feelings. How can you express that in a way that other people understand and can quickly understand? Because in music, you got a couple of minutes, don't bore us, get to the chorus, type of thing. You get your 3 minutes and 27 seconds of a song to convey your story. So, how can you quickly, share an emotion, get people to understand that emotion, and want to listen further? I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge of this. First of all, though, I'm not creating the art, the music necessarily for others. It's creating it for me. And if nobody ever listens to it at all, um, that's still okay. It's still a win for me, because I'm getting this out into a media that I want to, that's fulfilling for me. And if others find it helpful, that's even better yet.
And did your relationship with the guitar, Ray, or performing change after your diagnosis?
I wanted to do more of it. I have a two-piece band with my singer Scott's. Unfortunately, he's moved across the country. He lives in Miami now. Multiple myeloma interrupted some big plans for us with our band, the Chronic Padres. Particularly 2019 and the stem cell transplant, and then we move right into the pandemic, where we are a band that plays in bars and wineries and breweries, clubs. All of a sudden, we were kind of shut down. First from my illness, then from the global pandemic. It's like I want to play more. I love performing. My illness coupled with the pandemic, how much I missed performing and playing in front of others, and getting out there and capitalize on every opportunity we can.
I hope that you will be able to regain your physical and mental ability to perform and play the guitar again on stage, Ray.
Yeah, lately, every once in a while I go down to Laguna Beach, not far away, uh, pop up a little guitar case and play for an hour, collecting tips, playing for change on the street, hopefully getting enough to be able to to buy my supper that night.
What is the main message you hope people take from your story?
Yeah, message I like to tell folks, and we've shared, bits and pieces of it all through this thing. Uh, try life can be challenging. You get lots of challenges thrown your way, and a lot of times these challenges seem like obstacles. They aren't just challenges; they are something that's going to prevent me from doing something. I encourage folks, approach challenges with a sense of discovery, a growth mindset. It can be difficult, but just take a step back and say, how can I learn from this? And as you learn from it, realize that you are stronger than you know. This too you can overcome. So know that you're stronger than you are, and also know that you're not in it alone. No matter what it is that you're facing, there's somebody out there. Find that community and understand that as a community, you're stronger still. It meant so much to me to have people alongside me in my fight against cancer. It's different to have people behind you. People behind you, oh yeah, they're behind me, but I'm still a person up front. But knowing that they're alongside me, going through this, just energized me, motivated me, inspired me. So you're stronger than you are. Together as a community, we're stronger even still. Look at your challenges as you can, as opportunities, and know that you can overcome this.
Is there a specific question or let's say group of questions that people can ask themselves to better understand the message you deliver?
Yeah, I think the timeline exercise is a great exercise, and then just asking yourself, what does me doing this timeline, what does it mean to me? I really like people to focus on what they want to get accomplished, because I was guilty for so long, Lydia, of being one of those people that say one day I am going to dot dot dot. It's like, why one day? Let's get started today. You don't necessarily need to finish it, but at least get started today. Goals are dreams with a deadline. So take your dreams and break it down into goals. How can I accomplish what I want to do? I mean, you've already said one day I'm going to dot, 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 whatever that might be. Let's get started on it today. So, ask that question, what do I want to do and how do I get started? It's not necessarily about finishing. It's there. It can be a long journey, right? But you're never going to finish if you never start. So start. Whatever it is that is important to you that you want to accomplish, get started and make sure you put the people around you that you want to be around.
What is your message to me? Uh, here because I lost a beloved instructor because of multiple myeloma. So, how can you advise me to accept her um, physical absence?
Uh, One, sorry for your loss, and I it's difficult. So I'm sorry you had to go through that. You know, everybody's and you, Lydia, have to kind of experience it. You have a different experience and go for it in different ways. Whenever people face loss, I like I like to think of take solace in all the good memories and all the things that you can remember in a positive light. But also, how do you let their spirit move on? What were they able to teach you that you then can pass on to other folks, and even use them by name. My friend, my mentor, taught me this, and this is something that might be helpful for you. So, are the ways that you can pass that down through a a lesson from this important person that was in my life on an update on LinkedIn. This is something that helped me. This might be something that can help you. This is something I wanted to share with you in my LinkedIn community. A Facebook post, whether it's a article that you write or what have you. How do you keep their memories, their influence, their importance, not only still percolating within you, but to let their legacy, benefit the others around. So what are the creative ways that you can spread their good work that works so well for you to others? And hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully you'll be able to do that.
There any query or question I did not ask and you wish that I ask you?
Yeah. One question is, if there's people out here watching and listening, how can they get a hold of you? And folks, if there's ever, particularly if you're a myeloma patient, a blood cancer patient, or actually a patient, any kind of patient, you can reach out to me at any social media platform with my name. It's Ray Hartjen, Hartjen. My website is rayhartjen.com. My email address is rayhartjen@gmail.com. So, please, if there's ever anything I can do for you out there in the audience, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be honored to hear your story and to collaborate with you in any way that you see fit. So please reach out, and I'm here for you. Again, we all get something. We're all in this together, and just know I'm on your team.